The letter that brought her to his door was thin and practical, like everything else in his life. It listed his acreage, his habits, the weather that ruled his days. It did not list his loneliness, or the doctor's verdict spoken years ago in a room that smelled of antiseptic and finality. It did not say how the nights stretched wide on the prairie, how silence could bruise a man. When she stepped down from the stagecoach, dust clinging to her hem and courage holding her spine straight, he wondered if words had ever been enough to carry the weight of a life. He was shy by nature, a man who spoke to animals and fences more easily than to people. His name sounded awkward in his own mouth when he introduced himself. She smiled as if it were the most natural thing in the world to be there, as if the miles between her old life and this new one had not been filled with doubt. She held out her hand. He took it, surprised by the warmth, by how something so simple could feel so momentous. They ate supper in the kitchen while the wind pressed against the windows. He apologized for the plainness of the food. She said it tasted like home, though she could not have known what home would mean here yet. He watched her carefully, memorizing details he had no right to expect would last, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way her eyes moved, curious and unafraid. When the plates were cleared and the lamp turned low, the truth came back to him with a force that stole his breath. He had promised himself he would not trap her in a life built on omission. He told her then, voice rough, hands folded tight in his lap. He spoke of the diagnosis, the certainty, the long years of being the man who stood apart at christenings and funerals alike. He said she was free to go. He said it fast, like tearing a bandage. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, the silence did not feel like judgment. It felt like space. I know what I agreed to, she said finally. And I know what I want. She did not say it with bravado. She said it with steadiness. I want a husband. I want a life. And I want to start it now. Later, when they stood awkwardly at the threshold of the bedroom, he felt his old fear rise, of being seen, of being found wanting. She sensed it and spoke first. I'm your wife, she said gently. Can I do it? The question was not what it sounded like on the surface. It was an offering of trust, of partnership, of a beginning chosen rather than endured. He nodded because there were no words strong enough. What followed was not spectacle but tenderness. He learned the sound of her breathing. She learned the weight of his carefulness. The night passed without ceremony, without promises made in haste. In the quiet after, he stared at the ceiling, astonished by the simple fact that he was not alone. Morning came pale and clean. She rose before him and stood at the window, sunlight making a halo of dust motes around her. He watched from the bed, heart full of a feeling he had no name for yet. When she turned, she smiled like someone who had crossed a river and found solid ground. The days settled into a rhythm neither had expected to feel so natural. She took to the land with a quick, bright intelligence, asking questions, learning which gates stuck and which fields flooded first in spring. He found himself talking more, explaining the why of things he had always done by instinct. Evenings were for shared meals and quiet conversation, for the comfort of another presence in the room. There were moments of doubt. He would catch her watching children in town, her expression unreadable, and his chest would tighten. He would remember the certainty he had carried like a brand. When he voiced his fear, she took his hands and held them until his breathing slowed. We don't know what the future will be, she said. But we know who we'll be facing it with. Weeks passed. Then months. Summer burned the fields gold. They worked side by side, sweat and laughter mingling, building something that felt sturdy enough to weather storms. He discovered that shyness could coexist with courage, that love did not demand a man be loud to be true. One morning, she was pale at the breakfast table. She excused herself, then returned with a look that made him set his cup down carefully, as if sudden movements might break whatever fragile thing hovered between them. I might be wrong, she said, voice barely above a whisper. But I think something's different. He felt the old fear rise, sharp and insistent. He did not want hope to make a fool of him again. They waited. Days stretched thin. When the doctor finally came, when the words were spoken and confirmed, he sat on the edge of a chair, stunned. The world did not shatter. It expanded. He laughed and cried at once, hands shaking. She knelt in front of him, steady as ever, anchoring him to the floor. The news traveled fast in a town that thrived on stories. Some were kind, some were not. He learned to ignore the whispers, focusing instead on the small, sacred tasks of caring. He learned to cook better. She learned to rest when her body asked for it. They argued, briefly and clumsily, about names and futures, then laughed at themselves for arguing at all. Autumn came. The air sharpened. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding the wood until it was smooth enough to trust. She sat nearby, mending, humming softly. He realized then that miracles were rarely loud. They arrived quietly, disguised as days that simply kept coming. When winter set in, he worried constantly. She teased him for it, but he could not help the vigilance. He had been given something precious and did not yet trust the world not to take it back. Nights were for listening to the wind and the steady reassurance of her presence beside him. The birth came on a stormy night. The midwife arrived with practiced calm. He waited outside the room, pacing, praying in a way he had not done since he was a boy. When the cry finally came, thin and fierce, he sank to his knees. He held his child with awe, the weight of it grounding him in a reality he had never dared to imagine. In the weeks that followed, exhaustion and joy braided themselves together. He learned to move through the house softly. She watched him with a smile that held gratitude and something like wonder. They were no longer just survivors of their own pasts. They were builders. Years passed. The land changed, and so did they. Children came with their own tempests and calms. He remained shy, but he learned to speak when it mattered. She remained brave, but she learned to lean on him too. The doctor's verdict became a story told rarely, more myth than memory. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would think back to the night she asked her simple, brave question. He would remember the way his fear had loosened its grip, the way trust had opened a door he did not know existed. He would hold her hand and feel the life they had made together pulsing there, undeniable and real.